In the recording about internal and external validity, I mentioned that they can help us think about alternative explanation for the results of a study, and I'll focus on that idea in thinking about the related section of the analysis template. First, it's helpful to think about the findings of the study and what the direct explanation of the results would be. In this case, we could summarize that by saying that the direct explanation of the difference between the groups on each of the dependent variables is because the different postures caused participants to think and feel differently when they were stressed. With that in mind, the alternative explanations would consider other variables that could have influenced emotions, self-esteem, and perceptions of threat when participants were stressed, and could have done so in a way that created differences between the groups. If we think about the representativeness of the sample, we might question whether other cultural groups, older people, or people with mental disorders would respond differently. That doesn't suggest an alternative explanation for why there were differences between slumped and upright groups in this study, though. We identified 3 potential threats to the internal validity of this study, and therefore 3 potential sources of alternative explanations: repeated testing, regression to the mean, and selection. They reduced the selection threat with random assignment, though. Repeated testing could influence participant responses, but it might be more likely to lead to a lack of difference between the groups. To create an alternative explanation, the upright group would have all had to have been influenced in the same way, which is probably pretty unlikely. Similarly, the difference between the groups probably wasn't because of regression to the mean. For regression to the mean to influence the results, the participants in the upright group would have all needed to have had unusually low scores at the baseline, and the slumped group would have all had to have had unusually high scores. Threats to external validity are less direct in creating alternative explanations. In other words, since they're concerned with how the results would apply in the real world, they aren't related to the differences between the groups or lack thereof. Thinking about the realism can help us think about the results from a different perspective, though, and that can help us identify alternative explanations. For example, my notes about mundane and psychological realism got me thinking about what the participants would have been looking at during the stress task. I might have even rolled back from my desk to sit in the 2 different positions. I realized participants in the slump position would have been looking at the floor, maybe at the base of the tripod holding the video camera or at the researcher's feet. In contrast, those who were in the upright group would have been looking straight ahead. That difference in what participants were looking at may have influenced their thought processes. So my train of thought is that the different visual input might have actually caused the difference in the dependent variables, which is the point I want to note in my analysis. I haven't come up with a strong way to tease out the potential cause, whether it's the posture itself versus the visual input, though.